Welcome back to the Man Cave, everybody, and the ManTFup podcast, episode 58. I'm Kimmy B.
And Lenny.
And of course, before we go any further, we would like for you to like, subscribe, share, and follow. We are absolutely everywhere. Make sure you're ready to drop your comments on any of the social media platforms where you may be seeing some of our clips, whether that's YouTube Shorts, on TikTok, on Instagram. Absolutely love engaging with you guys. Had some very interesting IG debates as of late, which we can get into in a little bit. But first, Len, we've got to talk about this busy SCOTUS. No, I did not say scrotum. I said SCOTUS. The Supreme Court of the United States of America has been at it again. Definitely making some very big rulings, one of which being or having to do with affirmative action as it pertains to college admissions. This has definitely been a debate in different circles for a very, very long time. The entire affirmative action, Title IX, conversation. But basically, in another majority, or I should say in another major reversal, Supreme Court struck down affirmative action policies at colleges and universities that use race as a factor in deciding who is admitted. In a pair of decisions, the 6 conservative justices ruled that Harvard, the nation's oldest private college, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the oldest state university, were illegally discriminating based on race and violating the Constitution.
I could see that.
You can see that.
I can see that, and I'm big on school. I think school's important.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're at that level of education,
Mm-hmm.
race shouldn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It should only be on academics and achievements.
Unfortunately, though, not everybody in this country has access to the same quality and the same caliber and the same level of education as everybody else. And that is why affirmative action was actually put in place quite a few years ago.
So then why don't they fix the real problem, which is the lower education?
That I will never, ever disagree with you on. I think the fact that we needed affirmative action, the fact that we needed a civil rights bill.
No, at that time it was critical. And it's still an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think that higher education should not take that into consideration at all.
Again, until you start to see a true, I don't even know the proper term, but I want to say like an equalizing, a leveling off across all groups of people in this country, I don't think that you can make that definitive claim. There are plenty of people, Justice Clarence Thomas being one of them, who have praised the opportunities that affirmative action afforded them. We've seen it time and again, Len, right? Like, so I'm going to take it out of the schools, right? And I'm going to take it to business, because affirmative action clearly had sweeping ramifications and a very broad scope, right? It applied to the workplace, and it basically was supposed to make it so, any environment was reflective of the surrounding community, or I should say the demographics, right? So if you live in a community that's 65% white, 25%, or I should say 20% black, and then 15% other, Black and Latino, your state schools in particular should look like that, right? If those are the demographics of the state of Massachusetts, then the UMass public education system, like the especially the higher, should be reflective of that, because if all of our public schools are equal, then there should be.
Yeah, but University of Florida, it's a public school. Yeah, it's a Florida state public school, but they base their intake on education, on the level, the criteria to get into even a state college now is way higher than it used to be. So, if you start adding race into that.
I mean, but it's been added.
No, I get it, but it's almost, it's not fair to students who, might not be.
It's not fair to the students who had everything at their fingertips. It's not fair to them anymore because they had too much advantage, and now you're
too much advantage,
and now you're penalizing them for that. Is that what you're saying? Is that your argument?
You take it to advantage of a kid, okay?
If your parents
I don't care how much
money
your kid has. I don't care how much money your kid is. I don't care any of that, okay? Kids who are smart and believe in education achieve those levels.
College admission scandal. I'm just going to leave it at that.
That's a scam.
But that's what you're competing with, though. That's generations. That's legacy. If affirmative action is illegal according to the Supreme Court, so should legacy then. You shouldn't just get into a school, George Bush Jr., because you're the son of a former president. When you're he had no business.
That's not, first of all, that's not a public school.
But they just said, they just said it for Harvard and the public school system. So they've proved that affirmative action across the board.
George Bush is not. I mean,
legacy. But legacy is legacy, Len.
Yeah.
Legacy is legacy. So because your kids go to youth school, their kids now have a leg up as far as getting accepted. And that's just at a high school level. Your parents went to...
Let me ask you this. If you have... All right, so my kids go to private school. So their kids are going to have a leg up at going to that private school.
It's a don't.
But could it be based on the fact that they were good students throughout that school and they graduated with honors?
It could, but we know, like, don't play dumb now and say, and pretend like this is not the case for why people fought so hard to get some sort of, equalizer. Because when it comes to the highest levels of education, and we're not talking about Podunk U, we're talking about, when you talk about UNC Chapel Hill may as well be Ivy League. If you know anything about the U.S. collegiate system, UNC Chapel Hill is basically, it's not one of the original Ivies, but it is viewed by many academics as being up there. It's no different than, Stanford is an original Ivy League, but it too is viewed as being up there. Even the University of the Florida public schools, incredible universities. UF is constantly in the top 50 universities in the nation. Yeah. And that's going up toe-to-toe with the Harvards, the Yales, the Princetons, the Columbias, right? So this is not me pooping on state schools versus private schools. But you don't think that legacy matters at a state school? Of course it does. If your name is on a building, the likelihood of you getting accepted into that school is pretty fucking high. You don't think so?
Yeah, but why does affirmative action work
because
against
those
that?
kids, because guess what?
Those kids are getting in no matter what.
No, what? The
legacy kids.
Yeah, but guess what? Do you know how few, especially when affirmative action was put in place, how few black or brown legacy students there are? Like, black and brown people couldn't even get into institutions of higher learning because of their skin color. So for decades, for centuries, they were penalized because of the color of their skin. So for a few years, we've said, you know what? Because for the past 200, we wouldn't allow you to step foot on this campus. You know what I'm saying? Now we're going to go ahead and say, we're going to set aside XYZ spots just for you guys. It doesn't mean that these students aren't bringing the grades. It doesn't mean that these students aren't bringing the extracurriculars. It'd be different if you were saying, okay, the kid with a 0.08 GPA is getting in just because they're black. It's not that. They still have to compete at the highest levels. They're just saying, we're going to set aside this amount of spots so that our campus doesn't look like, it looks more like Ben and Jerry's when you walk in and less like, I don't know, MacArthur Dairy Farm. Like, that was a bad analogy, but you get it. Like, milk is pretty much just white. And at least when you go to Ben & Jerry's, you got a lot of different colors there. No? Still not?
Yeah,
But you get my point. Like,
I get your point, but I still am not. Listen,
Lenny,
I think it's important. I think it's important for equality. Don't get me wrong, okay? But, you're never going to compete against the 1% when it comes to their kids having privilege. You're never going to compete. That 1%, okay, which is literally just 1% of the population. Is that
But you do
that
realize
level
that,
of legacy?
But you do, and yes, but when we're talking, first of all, it's 1% of Americans that are going to a lot of these higher end schools where this is even a factor. You know, when we get into the backstory of why these schools were brought before the Supreme Court of the United States of America, it's because, you know.
Do we know how many people apply to Harvard every year?
I mean, you have a phone sitting in front of you. You can.
No, I'm
Google
just
it.
curious. I just, how
It's
many
not a whole.
spots are available?
It's not a whole lot, and it's not a lot.
I bet they get a lot of applications.
Oh, no, I mean, not the same as the University of Florida. It's a private institution, and a very, very selective private institution at that.
I still bet they get a lot of applications.
Let's see. Let's Google it. How
Let's
many people apply to Harvard on any given year? Bam. Regular applications. Harvard class of 2027 acceptance rate. What the Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Regular applications, 47,384. Early applicants, 9,553. There's a 2.6 acceptance rate for regular applications. There's a 7.6 acceptance rate for early, because, you know, if you apply early, you really only apply to one school. That's your one and done. If you get in, boom, that's where you're going. Overall, they have a 3.4% acceptance rate.
Yeah, and that's probably their capacity.
Mm-hmm.
They accept up to their capacity. So, you know, you're talking 50,000 kids roughly, 1,500, 2,000.
But you realize we have like 100, and we have 130,000 public, it's like 100,000 K through 12 public schools and like 30,000 private. So that's out of a student body coming from 130,000 schools across the nation, public, private, whatever. 56,000 of those kids are applying to Harvard.
Yeah, I feel you. But it's now, out of those 50,000 kids, is it fair to them to, let's just say 1% of them is legacy. So now you only have 1,700 spots left.
Mm-hmm.
So is it fair to pick that on race? That's all the
It's
question
not about
is.
picking it on race, though. It's about allotting a certain number of spots out of a class.
Based on race.
Yeah, but still competing within the same parameters.
Yes. I believe that academics should
Of academics,
speak above all.
extracurriculars,
Yes,
what they're bringing to the table is sports, community engagement. I mean, you're talking about the creme de la creme.
Yeah, but
regardless.
you just hit on something. Sports. So
you're also talking about now you're getting into like financial need based applicants. You're talking about,
is it fair? Is it fair that someone who plays football better gets into a college?
Well,
is that fair?
There's scholarships set up, but here's the deal: there's scholarships set aside specifically for those individuals.
It's not about paying. It's not about paying. It's about academics.
No, but that's set aside. That's set aside. And on top of that, here's the deal: like, whether it's fair or not, any student on a campus needs to acknowledge the fact that unless you're at an Ivy League, and even there, they like a win. Most of what you see around your campus is predicated on how great your sports teams are. People like to be a part of winning legacy. This is a different conversation, but like even at the University of Miami.
It's sort of a different conversation, but
what I'm saying,
let's just say, okay, now we have 0.5% put aside for
But that doesn't
athletics.
happen, because that doesn't happen at Harvard. You don't get in because of your sports ability.
Yes, well, unless you're on the crew team.
But no, you also have, and that's a different situation. That was Stanford, not Harvard. But my cousin was accepted to Harvard. Yeah. Brilliant, football player from Brockton, Greek dude, no sort of legacy. Ended up at the University of Pennsylvania and then went on to Wharton School of Business, which is actually, that is an Ivy League.
Yeah.
But I think, is UPenn an Ivy League?
One of my best friends went to Tufts and.
Well, no, that's my whole thing. But my point is, he wasn't getting a scholarship for playing football. He wasn't getting accepted because he played football. That was a bonus. They like to win, but he was getting in on his academic merit as well.
That's fine. And if that's the case,
and he's a white boy, he's Greek.
If academics are the basis, then I mean, there shouldn't be any issue.
But here's the issue.
So
but you know what they
if
really?
ath- if-
But
if-
Lenny, here's
if
where
academics were the basis,
but
none
this
of them
is-
would have a football
But this
team.
is why white kids are angry, and that's because that's who's bringing this up. This isn't about white students in general feel they are being discriminated against because they are not a protected class. So this is what the accusation.
Isn't that expected?
What?
Isn't that expected?
But listen to what I'm about to say to you, Lenny. So I'm explaining. There are more white students out of that amount of people that are applying. There are more white students with access to that level of education, whether it is private, whether it's a great public school. Like, look at what do you think the demographics are of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School?
Can you look at the demographics for the applicants to Harvard?
No, my point, but Lenny, my point to you is this: you're competing with a larger pool of your people. So of course the competition is going to be higher.
But what do you mean your people? It's like these are kids. These are
But what I'm
college
saying,
kids.
Lenny, the reason there's affirmative action is because there are less Black and brown students that have the academic background and basis to apply and get accepted. So they're setting aside a certain amount. You're still competing. It's just there's less. But I mean, I'm sure we can look up the demographics of how many of each person each race are.
How many applicants? What's the percentage of applicants by race for Harvard? I'm just curious.
And why shouldn't it be reflective of the community at large? Why shouldn't it?
So
about 40% of its newest class admitted are white, compared to 56% a decade ago. During that same time frame, the share of admitted students who are Asian American rose from 21 to 28%.
Those are admitted. What are the applicants?
Right down to, they're just giving me the Harvard students as a race. It's 40% white, 27.5% Asian, 10.8% Hispanic Latino, 9.3% African American, 2.2% Native American, Alaskan, well, so basically Pacific Islander, Hawaiian, and 10.6% mixed race or unknown. That is the
demographics of the class.
At Harvard, an Asian candidate is the 8th highest academic decile, had a 5.1% chance of admittance, compared to 7.5% for white people, 22.9% for Hispanic, and 44.5% for Black applicants, per the brief.
Yeah, so right there, if you're 44% more likely to get accepted because you're Black versus
but you're acting
8% Asian.
You're acting like just any rando Black person is applying. That's got to be a statistic based on the number of Black students that are actually
right now,
applying.
It's if you just forget about whites. If you go 44% of Black students get accepted over 8% of Asian students get accepted, why is that fair?
Out of how many though?
And
and
that's
guess
what
what?
we're trying to find out. How many?
What is the Asian population in America?
What do you mean?
What is the Asian population in the U.S.? So the University of California higher education system did a whole study on this, and their goal, and they have highly, highly competitive higher education institutions. You're talking about Berkeley, you're talking about UCLA, and they got rid of affirmative action. The state of California, I did not know this, back in 1996. That was a bill that was passed. So affirmative action has been gone there for what? Almost 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they have studied it and followed it, and they saw a dramatic decline in the diversity of their campuses following the banning of affirmative action. And their main goal was to ensure that their student body population was reflective of the graduating classes of both public and private high schools, right? So they felt that if, again, 60% of the graduating, high school students were white, 60% of their student body should be that. If 20% were Black, 20% should be that. If 10%, and so on and so forth. And they have not been able to maintain that level of diversity on their campuses, in particular at the UCLA's, the highly competitive, outlets of the University of California higher education system, since the ban was put on affirmative action. And they have spent millions and millions of dollars trying to engage students, and there's a lot of different reasons. It's not wanting to
did the number of applicants drop in those schools?
applicants drop? I don't.
Did the number of ethnic applicants drop after they
Ethnic and it's not the right word.
what?
Ethnic applicants.
That's Latin, Black, Asian.
Black is not an ethnicity.
Whatever you're put. What is it? What are we putting this under?
This is
all
on
about
race. This is based on race.
Okay,
racial
sorry,
discrimination.
race. Sorry.
Which is
Did
a
the
construct anyway,
did
but
the
whatever.
applicants of different races drop when they stopped affirmative action?
Yes, I told you that.
The applicants.
Yes, they saw a
So
noticeable decrease in the amount of people for multiple reasons.
a notable decrease in the
And
student
the
body.
amount. No.
But is that accepted or is it applicant wise?
It's applicants, Lenny. I told you. I've sent you
Okay.
articles and you don't read
Okay.
them.
Okay, so if it's applicants, then that's what I don't understand. So what you're telling me is they stopped affirmative action and Black and Asian and Latin kids stopped applying to the
So listen,
colleges?
those programs have enabled UC to make significant gains in its system-wide diversity. Yet despite its extensive efforts, UC struggles to enroll a student body that is sufficiently racially diverse to attain the educational benefits of diversity. The shortfall is especially apparent at the system's most selective schools, the university leader said. An affirmative action ban first caused a huge drop in diversity at top California universities. In 1996, California voters approved Proposition 209, an affirmative action ban at public universities in the state. Before the ban, UC Berkeley and UCLA were roughly representative of the California high school graduate population who were eligible for enrollment at universities. The ban first took effect with the incoming class of 1998. Subsequently, diversity plummeted at UC's most competitive campuses. That year, enrollment among Black and Latino students at UCLA and UC Berkeley fell by 40%, according to a 2020 study. As a result of the ban, Bleemer found that Black and Latino students who might have gone into those two top schools enrolled at less competitive campuses. Black and Hispanic students saw substantially poorer long-run labor market prospects as a result of losing access to these very selective universities, but there was no commensurate gain in the long-run outcomes for the white and Asian students who took their place.
But stop right there for 1 second. There's two things that are sticking out to me.
The ban has, in fact, let me finish this.
wait.
No, because this is what you asked for. The ban has, in fact, acted as a deterrent to prospective Black and Latino students. His study found that high-performing minority students were subsequently discouraged from applying to schools where minority students were underrepresented. Most do not want to attend a university where there's not a critical mass of same-race peers. That's because attending a school made less diverse by an affirmative action ban puts them at greater risk of being stereotyped and being isolated. These findings provide the first casual evidence that banning affirmative action exacerbates socioeconomic inequities.
It's interesting, but it's also interesting to me that kids wouldn't apply. It's interesting to me that 40% of the people who wanted to go to Stanford in any kind of ethnic diverse group just decided not to apply. It doesn't make sense. It's almost
because you're
like
not them. Because you're not them. So maybe it's not meant to make sense to you or I. Nothing kept me from applying to the University of Miami, even though I knew I couldn't afford to go there. You know what I mean? You take out loans, you do what you need to do.
yeah,
and
it doesn't make sense that affirmative action
But can I
carries that much weight prior to the application process. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can understand when you get to the school application
But
and you've
you
got
also understand that it costs money to apply to schools, right? Like, it costs a lot of money. It costs $50. It costs $100. I don't know the going rate. I know it was $100 for my application, and that was in 1998 for the University of Miami. So if you're putting money down, right, every application you're sending out, and you're a person from a marginalized or a disenfranchised or a poor background, right? You might be going, okay, well, if I've got $500 to spend on applications, I'm going to put them where I know I'm going to get in. Or maybe instead of applying at UCLA or UC Berkeley, I'm going to go with Howard, or I'm going to go with Morehouse.
I get it, but
Or I'm going to go with Texas A&M. Like, still good universities, but I know that they cater, and I know that they want my group.
Is affirmative action a guarantee that an ethnic student is going to get into a college?
Is it a guarantee that a Black, Latino, or Asian student is going to get into a college?
Yes. Is
No.
it a guarantee? So, back to what I'm saying. if it's not a guarantee, if you have affirmative action, what's the difference when you don't have affirmative action?
But do you realize that take affirmative action out of it? If you're applying to law schools, your advisor will tell you, don't pick a typical law school major, right? Like, don't necessarily go with
ambulance chaser,
philosophy. No. Like certain undergrad majors that tons of law school applicants are going to major in, because guess what? That increases the number of individuals you're competing against, right? Be a biology major. There's not a whole lot of bio majors that are applying to law school, right? Most bio majors want to be doctors. You know what I mean? So right there, that should tell you, like, if you know there's a certain number of spots available, or there's a way to lessen the amount of people that you're competing against, right? Because this amount of spots are set aside for XYZ. Now I know I'm still competing against the creme de la creme, but it's a smaller amount because there's less of us, and there's less of us that have had access to the type of education and the type of tools and resources needed to even qualify you to get into this type of school. You're acting like every kid graduating from every high school across the country because of affirmative action is like, I'm going to apply to Harvard. That's not happening.
I'm just curious how it works, because it doesn't make sense.
And again,
it doesn't make sense because, okay, affirmative action, they don't take every student just based on their race. So without affirmative action, they don't take every student based on their race. So what's the difference in the application? Why?
Knowing that
what
you're
caused these? Knowing that you're competing against the same people you were competing against before.
You are, but guess what?
There's 50,000 applicants.
But there's no spot set aside just for you. So again, if you're coming from an inner city, you're coming from a Compton high school where you don't have access to the 7,000 other extracurriculars that your private, private school
told me that affirmative action doesn't set aside specific spots for specific students.
Well, no, I didn't. That's exactly what I just said to you.
No.
That's what affirmative action does. It sets aside a certain number of spots for people based on their race.
But it's no guarantee that they'll get in.
No, but yes, because out of 50,000 applicants, if they set aside 40 spots, you don't think there's 40 qualified black applicants to fill those spots?
I'm sure there is. But without affirmative action, there's the same amount of spots and the same amount of applicants. Why wouldn't they still have that same?
Because there's more. Because there's still going to be more white kids. Like, so yes, there's probably a white kid who didn't get a spot. Yeah,
that the administration office, the administration
that there's a spot that went to a black kid that possibly could have gone to a white kid.
At the administration at Harvard who's going over the applications is a racist.
How are they a racist?
Because without affirmative action, they just take white kids.
It's supposed to be an equalizer for people who don't have the same access and opportunity to top-tier education.
It's completely based on race.
Lenny, no.
Based on race.
AP classes cost money, right? AP classes cost money. So not every kid. This is a socioeconomic thing. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of people from marginalized communities that also happen to be.
But does affirmative action mean they pay for school, or they get
Lenny, but
grants?
The point is,
it's all based on
Lenny. No, you're not. Oh my God, you're so fucking frustrating sometimes because you know what affirmative action does and you get it, and now you just want to play dumb. At the end of the day, how many people at your kids' school are white, are privileged, can afford to take AP courses? How many?
All of them.
All of them, right? Okay. Well, they're not all white, but you understand what I'm saying. How many kids do you think at Carroll City High School, Carroll City Senior High School, can afford to take AP courses at $100 and something plus and it's the AP exam that
Well,
costs money and everything else.
That goes to the failure
No,
of our.
I get
goes
that,
to
Len,
the
but those
failure
are the
of our public
determining
schools.
factors. Those are some of the things that play a pivotal role in whether or not your application even gets looked at. You said it yourself. Like, to go to the University of Miami, don't even apply. Don't even submit your SAT scores if you're not at this level. And we have proven that the SATs, right? Like, there's a ton of university systems that are actually getting rid of the SATs because they found that they're racially biased.
But your argument, Kimmy, is that these students have the same academic level as these students. So you have the ethnic students that are 1400 SAT, did all their community service, did all this stuff, they're in band, they're in this, they're in that, and the same white kid over here they're exactly the same. You're telling me that they're exactly the same when they enter college. So forget about what happened at Carroll City High School.
But I didn't tell you that, though.
But
what I'm telling you is the creme de la creme of these groups are all applying. Some things are weighted higher. Some GPAs are weighted higher. Some people have all their AP courses, and those are all qualified.
So is it academics?
Why do you have a problem with them doing this for people, though? I don't understand. Considering for hundreds of years, women and people of color were not allowed access to these schools. Do you think that you can even it out in 30 or 40 years? You can even out all of that advantage in 30 or 40 years? So now it's time to just get rid of it. Okay, you guys have had your opportunity.
Is the advantage academic?
You just saw
racial?
it. What do you mean? Going to those schools is an academic advantage. It's a networking advantage. Having access to certain universities is most definitely a game changer with earning potential.
You go to Harvard for the Rolodex. I get it. But back to what I was saying about California. Okay? They saw a 40% decrease in applications, which means that without affirmative action, let me finish what I'm saying.
Go for it.
Okay? They saw a 40% decline in applications. Okay? Because those kids think, those 40% think that if they apply there,
they're not going to get it.
Based on race.
Because that was true before fucking affirmative action.
I get it.
Because that is historically and accurately true in this country.
So you're clearly saying that the people at the college's admissions are favoring white people.
Historically in this country, they surely do.
Historically,
they surely do.
I still think if you have the right academics and your colleges are
you're literally you go back. It's funny because you're such a pessimist in some ways, and then you all of a sudden, when it comes to racial issues, want to believe that we live in this utopian place where everybody is graded on their fucking merit. We saw it with a massive scandal where parents who could afford to pay $500,000 for a fake rowing picture were able to buy their children's way in.
That's the 1%. That's the 1%.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, this is helping socioeconomically disenfranchised or disadvantaged individuals access higher education.
But why is it help? But you're taking it to socioeconomics.
Because unfortunately, that also has to do with race in a lot of situations, Len.
But you're taking it to socioeconomics, and you're telling me, on the other hand, that these kids are equal academically. So if they're equal academically, it shouldn't matter if they're poor or not.
But it does.
But why?
I don't know. Ask the fucking people over admissions.
Here's my point with California. Okay,
and that's a public school system.
But they're taking it on race because they're not taking the person's credit score or how much money they have. They're taking that's not on your application. They're taking it based on race.
You understand though, like I want it. No. But Lenny, I'm saying academically, yes, you can have the same SAT score and go to whatever. Do you really think that the kid at We've proven this. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is a school here in South Florida, right? It's an A school. A school less than 3 miles away is a C school, right? And that's a current controversy. Do you really think that your kids have the same access and opportunity and experience as far as high school goes as kids in majority of our public, our inner city public schools?
Kimmy,
do you?
No.
Okay, so when kids like that are applying, first of all, there's so many different factors that go into that process. It's also connections. It's who's writing your fucking letters. Like, you usually have to get, some sort of, I don't want to say a qualifying letter, but you usually have to get letters of recommendation from teachers.
So what are you telling me? Is affirmative action allowing students that are ethnic?
It allows universities to take race into account when looking at a student's application and transcript.
Which is fine, which eliminates all the things you're talking about.
No,
it eliminates
with affirmative action. Yes, it does. But when you take that away, no. So the kid who's going up against, okay, so
why?
Because I don't have access to a senator to write me a letter of recommendation at his alma mater.
It doesn't make sense to me. Okay, you have the person that's accepting or denying the applications at the university, right?
Lenny,
wait. You have the person who's accepting or denying the applications at the university.
It's a panel.
Okay, you have a panel. Okay, today affirmative action is in place. Tomorrow it's not. It's the same fucking panel. What changed their mind?
They're required to accept a certain amount, or they're allowed to take into consideration if somebody's application has some deviations. You're not even supposed to now, I don't think, use your race in your essay. Like you understand, some kids are accepted based on an essay, right? Like, there's different criteria for what gets you into a college. So some of it is on academic merit. Like, you might just have a 1,600 in your SATs. You blew your ACTs out of the water. Like, you're just a savant, right? But maybe that's all you did was study. And colleges, admission boards in particular, right, want diversity. They want well-rounded students. So now maybe you've got a kid who,
I guess it depends where you're going.
Got a 1,400.
MIT wants nerds.
Sure. But guess what? They are getting the nerdiest of the nerdy. Mm-hmm. They also want people that can go out there and can actually communicate with individuals too. They want a few of those. Like, not everybody that goes to, MIT is a complete social,
outcast.
And not even an outcast, but just inept with, social skills. Like, not everybody is. They're just brilliant and oftentimes can't engage in conversation with not so brilliant people. My point is, when you're talking about academic admissions and you're writing an essay, like for me, I know I didn't get into on my GPA and my SAT scores alone. It was my writing ability and my essay. It was my story. We were talking about diversity, all kinds of things. Like, that plays a factor into it. But if you're not allowed to take that into consideration, if you're not allowed to take into consideration where somebody comes from and their backstory and why, they were working 3 jobs, or why they're aspired to go to school.
The board is allowed to.
No, they just said they're not allowed to take race into consideration.
The board is allowed to take that person's background into consideration. It doesn't have to do with race. They're allowed to take
sometimes your racial experience is what you're writing about. Your experience in this world, in this country, in your community could actually be predicated on your race. Like, I don't know why that's a difficult conversation for you.
It's not difficult. I'm just trying to understand the two things that happened immediately after they canceled affirmative action in California.
Why would
40% of the kids stopped applying, which doesn't make sense because
to you.
But you still have the same.
To you, it doesn't make sense to you.
The lottery doesn't make sense to me. You have a 1 in 50 million chance of winning the lottery, yet everybody every day goes and spends $1 on a ticket.
Not everybody, the same people.
But yes,
the same people. So the same people who assume they're going to get accepted into a college that don't benefit from affirmative action.
Did you ever hear that expression?
I did, Lenny, but I'm also not a person of color in this country. I'm a woman. I benefit from affirmative action to some degree too, don't I? Title IX, there's a bunch of different things that fall under that umbrella, right? Like, there's schools that were penalized, the University of Miami being one of them when Title IX went into place. Because you have to have the same number of scholarships for women available athletically as you do for men. Well, when you go to a private university, right, that scholarship money isn't the same as it is at a public university. So if you've got a very competitive football program that takes up 125 scholarships, you got to fill a lot of female sports, right, to make up just for that one male team. So we lost golf. I mean, we were national champs. I think we lost our men's swim team, like scholarship-wise. Like, a bunch of shit happened. And we have had Olympic level, like, Greg, Lou Gaines went to the University of Miami. You know what I mean? Like, our coaches are the coaches, our diving team coaches for the U.S. national team, or were when I was there. You know what I mean? So there were pitfalls, and that was something that a lot of people challenged. Like, well, this isn't fair because now men are, are bearing the brunt or the burden of this quote unquote equality. But guess what? That's the price you pay for getting the advantage for so fucking long. Like, that's the price to play. Like, I don't know. And I don't see why there's a problem with evening out the playing field and at least acknowledging why we needed affirmative action in the first place. I mean,
no,
again,
I understand that.
Clarence Thomas said it himself. He is the perfect example of a person who benefited from affirmative action. He said, I don't know where I would be without this. And then sat in his fucking chair and just voted against it. Like, talk about hypocrisy. Like, forgetting where you come from. That's absolutely wild to me. You had President Obama, Michelle Obama discussing like their experiences at Harvard.
But again, what I'm not getting, is this is the state of California. The state of California says our public schools are no longer going to take affirmative action into consideration for this. Why wouldn't the state of California now say, okay, do it based on this criteria, which could also include socioeconomically less abundant students based on their merits and based on I mean, it just doesn't, if they eliminated affirmative action for what reason? Because they felt it was unconstitutional. Because why did they do it?
Because they felt that white people were being discriminated against because they're white.
Why didn't they support other means to get the 40% falling off just doesn't make sense to me, and it's mainly because it's like
that employers,
working for public jobs, cities, you almost can't get fired. It's like very difficult to get fired from a city job. But why? You could have the dumbest person doing the job and you can't fire them because they're a dumbass person and they can't do the job. You have to go through all these hoops to keep them there. It's
But you do realize, though, that whether people realize it or not, we all carry a bias. And it's been proven time and time again. If you go to employers, they oftentimes hire people that look like them. Or you hire the friends of people that look like you or that were recommended to you by people that you associate with. So if you don't have access to the circles, right? And if the people on the board of admissions are sitting there and, don't look like you, which was historically in academics and especially in higher academia, again, people, a massive part of the population in the United States of America was denied access to those routes for decades. I mean, women have only had the right to vote in this country since 1920. We couldn't bank without a man. You know what I'm saying? When you talk about
100 years, Kimmy.
And our country is over 200 years old. So literally, for more than half of this country's existence, we didn't.
But
and 100 years ain't that long ago, Len.
Listen, half of this country's existence. I mean, you have to take into consideration.
Lenny, do you realize? Wait a minute.
You have to take into consideration, Kimmy, where the whole entire planet was 100 years ago. We didn't fly till 1907. We didn't have iPhones. Till
we had a
2007.
constitution, though, in 1776, didn't we?
Yes.
Guess what? The Supreme Court
based on historical stuff from
and
previous.
Guess what? So with that being said, Len, they could technically roll back women's rights to vote. Do you know why? Because historically and accurately, according to the Constitution, for a longer period of time than which women have had the right to vote, women did not have the right to vote. That was what they used for Roe v. Wade.
I get it.
No. So don't tell me it was just 100 years ago. Len, that's a fucking scary place to live at. And that's the same shit that they're going by with affirmative action. And that is how this court is ruling over this nation right now. So guess what? Go back 100. You don't even have to go back 100 years. What? Separate but equal. The 1950s. What is that? 70 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so even less than women have had the right to vote. They can definitely get rid of that one.
I feel you.
Same-sex marriage, 2015. I had somebody literally, anyway, that's, again, different conversation. But so don't prove my point for me. Like, for majority of this nation's history, people have been marginalized and disenfranchised. Period.
I don't understand.
And by that I mean limited access.
You're talking about California, which is the most liberal state in the country, for the most part.
At this point in time, yes, they were the first ones to ban.
At this point in time, they're the most liberal state in the country. Were they?
Pretty sure. Who was that?
When did they do it? 96?
They did it in 96.
They were fairly liberal in 96.
They were fairly liberal when Reagan, who was a Republican,
yes,
was governor and passed pro-abortion laws.
So you have the most liberal state in the country.
Even when it's conservative.
You have the most liberal state in the country.
It's not the most
that
liberal,
stops
now
affirmative action. And immediately 40% of the ethnic applications drop, and the diversity on the campus goes down. So how do you...
And they still haven't gotten it back to where it was.
And mainly liberal schools. I mean, you're talking about Berkeley. You're talking about, you're talking about schools that are, I mean, California schools are notoriously
according to most people, aside from a handful of Christian-backed or faith-based institutions of higher learning,
point is,
the entire collegiate system in the United States of America is liberal. I mean, if you let Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok
so if it's left-leaning...
What does that even mean? They're educating people. What does that mean, left-leaning? Because you can certainly take conservative policy classes on any of these campuses.
If it's more liberal, then why does affirmative action have to be I'm trying to grasp the concept.
Lenny, I don't know
I understand what affirmative action is for. I get all that. But if you're sitting here saying, okay, the colleges are teaching, more liberal, open stuff, why isn't their enrollment the same way?
But what does what they're teaching have to... what are you talking about? What are you making it about now? What their academic platform is versus people just applying?
I'm making it about the same thing I was making it about before. The board that approves the applications the day before affirmative action was denied, and the board after.
Because
it's the same
historically
people.
You
it's
have not, if historically prior to something being in place, you were denied access, why would you think, again, and you're on a limited, I can't speak to it, but these are public universities, right? So, I mean, again, you have people from all walks of life that apply.
Nobody is denying anybody access to the school. Any person can go to those schools. Nobody is denying them.
Lenny,
this is not segregation.
But it was.
It was, but it's not anymore, Kimmy.
No.
It's not anymore.
Oh my God.
It's not anymore. I'm just trying to understand.
It's not anymore. But what they're telling you is it damn near reverted back to it. The numbers. When you lose 40% of your applicants, because that's
40% of your ethnic applicants, not 40% of your applicants.
No, because white people know they're getting in. Like, what? I don't understand.
That's so not true. That's so not true, because I know plenty of white kids that apply for fucking schools and don't think they're going to get in and don't know they're going to get in. Okay? My daughter does not know.
She's applying to the University of motherfucking Miami, which is a private institution and one of the greatest
You're telling me that
would she get into the University of Florida? I bet she would. I bet she'd get into
white kid that applies for University of Florida
gets in?
Absolutely not.
What I'm saying to you is I bet you she'd get into the kids that are applying that didn't stop applying. Why would white kids stop applying because there's no more affirmative action? Why would they do that? They were applying when there was. They were applying before it. They were applying during it. Of course, they're going to continue to apply. The kids who have limited resources and have to figure out where their best bet is in terms of getting in.
It's not based on academics. It's based on skin color.
Lenny, that is what affirmative...
No, but you're telling me that at these public schools in California, these kids stopped applying because they don't feel like they can compete.
Read it. No. How fucking dare you? They don't feel like they can compete. What they don't want to be
without affirmative action.
What they don't want to be is the only black kid, Asian kid, Pacific Islander on a campus. What they don't want to do is I'm speaking for a community that I do not represent, but I'm going off of what I'm reading to you, and it's like clearly if you've undone something that was there to set us, I don't understand what the problem is. And I realize I'm not answering your question. Affirmative action is exactly what it is. It was made to, it was put in place to ensure that groups of marginalized or protected people had access to these places, that you had to hide. Like, you couldn't just have an all, white staff. You couldn't.
So it's based on race.
Yeah, nobody said that it wasn't.
No, but I mean the school thing.
But Lenny, what I'm saying to you is you have the same level of competitiveness. So like, these kids are still competing, but when you're competing against you, again, a smaller, you're already a smaller group of the population. We know that. Like, we know there are, why is that a bad thing to say, okay, especially in public universities, our campuses should be reflective of our state's demographics? Why is that bad? You mean to tell me that 18% of the University of Florida
I get it.
shouldn't?
But why is it the board? Why did the board change their
The board didn't. The people in California voted for it.
No, but why did the board at the school now stop taking black applicants and putting them in the school?
But kids apply to schools with the hopes of getting in. So if I'm literally, if you said, if I know how, again, and they said it was specifically with the most competitive UC schools. So they're using UCLA and UC Berkeley, which again are up there with the UNC Chapel Hills and the universities of Florida. They're highly, highly competitive schools. It's like saying, I mean, give me another like the University of Florida, USF, University of South Florida. I don't know. Like, there's different campuses. Florida State University, right?
I don't understand.
But okay, it's like me knowing even as a white person right now, what the requirements are to get into the University of Florida versus what the requirements are to get in to USF, right? If I only have, like I said, if I'm only applying to 3 or 4 schools because that's what I can afford and whatever, I might not even apply to UF, right? Like, because they just keep raising the ante. And it's like, if I don't have all of these extras and I don't have all of these things, so maybe I just apply to USF, right? That's even as a white person. So
I get it, Kimmy. But again, like I'm telling you, okay, they weren't assured of being accepted to this school with affirmative action. They were not. That was no guarantee you're going to get into this school. So without affirmative action, why stop applying? It's the same guarantee. You have the same chances of getting into that school because the 5 people on the board are the same 5 people on the board, and they're picking based on.
They had to fill, but they had certain spots that were set aside for a certain group of people. That's not to say that they would have automatically given those spots to
Nobody's
a person
saying
of
that
color.
The school can't do that still.
No, but they're not allowed to take into consideration these certain particular factors. Like, I mean, I'm just telling you why the people that are in academia are a little frightened. We know what our college campuses looked like before affirmative action. We know this.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, well, that was before the
Lenny,
Civil
you're
Rights
giving
Act.
people a lot of credit. Like, look at what's happening right now in 2023. I don't understand. Why do you think people have changed so much? They haven't.
Oh, okay.
You think that they have? You think that they have?
I think we've come a long way.
You think that we've come a long way? Okay. I mean,
I think our whole education system is broken. I think our whole healthcare system is broken. But I think as people, we have come a long way.
mm-hmm. So, I mean, Michelle Obama was talking about it, and she recounts, being admitted to Princeton. She's like, back in college, I was one of the few black students on my campus, and I was proud of getting into such a respected school. I knew I'd worked hard for it, but still, I sometimes wondered if people thought I got there because of affirmative action. It was a shadow that students like me couldn't shake, whether those doubts came from the outside or inside our own minds. But the fact is this, I belonged. And semester after semester, decade after decade, for more than half a century, countless students like me showed they belonged too. It wasn't just the kids of color who benefited either. Every student who heard a perspective they might not have encountered, who had an assumption challenged, who had their minds and their hearts opened, gained a lot as well. It wasn't perfect, but there's no doubt that it helped offer new ladders of opportunity for those who, throughout our history, have too often been denied a chance to show how fast they can climb. Of course, students on my campus and countless others across the country and continue to be granted special consideration for admissions. Some have parents who graduated from the same school. Others have families who can afford coaches to help them run faster or hit a ball harder. Others go to high schools with lavish resources for tutors and extensive standardized test prep that help them score higher on college entrance exams. We don't usually question if those students belong. So often we just accept that money, power, and privilege are perfectly justifiable forms of affirmative action, while kids growing up like I did are expected to compete when the ground is anything but level. So today, my heart breaks for any young person out there who's wondering what their future holds and what kinds of chances will be open to them. And while I know the strength and grit that lies inside kids who have always had to sweat a little more to climb the same ladders, I hope and I pray that the rest of us are willing to sweat a little too. Today is a reminder that we've got to do the work, not just to enact policies that reflect our values of equity and fairness, but to truly make those values real in all of our schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So again, because we have not taken the time while affirmative action was in place to do the thing she's talking about, right? Which is steady or level the playing field as far as public education goes.
Mm-hmm.
We are reverting back to it.
Do you think Michelle Obama would have applied to Princeton if she didn't have affirmative action?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can't speak for Michelle Obama.
It's.
Why do you have a problem, though, with giving?
I don't have a problem with it.
People
I don't
access.
have a problem.
Like,
they have access.
Oh, my God.
They have access.
Do you think, again, I go back to...
If a kid is brilliant, they're getting in a fucking college. It's that fucking simple. Okay? I'm sorry that your parents didn't have money. I'm sorry that you didn't have this. I didn't fucking have all the privileges growing up. I did what I did.
You dropped out of high school, bro.
I dropped out of fucking middle school, but that's not the point.
No, we're talking about college, so that is the point. So you have no clue what it takes to get into college, and
No,
now
I have a clue what it takes to make it.
As a grown-ass man, you have provided your children with every fucking privileged opportunity you can in order to ensure that if that is the path that they choose to take, they've got it.
Yeah.
Right?
You're right.
Okay, there's a lot of people out there that don't, and that's all she's saying, is that...
Yes, I get that, but it's before college or it's college. We're talking about affirmative action in college. If you no matter what your upbringing is, have the academic achievement and worked hard enough to deserve to be in a college.
No, Lenny.
If you've worked hard enough and you're at that academic level, at the college level, affirmative action shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter to the people who are taking the admission.
It does, though, matter when you're talking about certain types of institutions. When you're talking about the elite of the elite, where it's not necessarily who you know, it's not necessarily what you know, but who you know, when it's about who you're getting your letters of recommendation from, when it's about whether or not you've got the resources, and that is a lot of these schools. Do you know how hard UNC is to get into for an out-of-state student? The same way, do you know how hard it is to get into UCLA, how hard it is to get into Berkeley for an out-of-state applicant? It's difficult to get into UF too. Like, it's crazy. I went through all of this. Like, I was that kid sitting there looking at all of these incredible schools when I was getting ready, to apply. And I went to a phenomenal public high school. I will never, ever, ever shit on Massachusetts public education, but that's a state that truly values education. It's one of the most cerebral fucking states, in the union. It is what it is. But that is not the case in every other state. So I think beyond just race, I think you have to take into account socioeconomics. I think there's a lot of people that deserve some sort of enclave, right? Like, there's reasons why some kids don't achieve a 8 whatever. Some kid actually had like an 8.0 GPA. It was wild. But like, when you're working two jobs, when you're taking care of your family because, you're in a single parent household, or you lost your parents, or, poverty is just the name of the game. Like, there's things that can curb, your academics. But if given the opportunity and given access to something, or like a Harvard or a UNC, that can, and you're able to just get in there.
Have the access if they get to that level. You're talking about prior to that level and them having access
No.
to get to that level.
Exactly, Lenny.
They have access to get to that level.
But if not taking into consideration their background, where they come from, I hate to say their skin color, but that is part of that whole situation. Their transcript doesn't necessarily maybe stand out. If you can't use those things, if you can't use who you are and where you come from to your advantage when you're explaining, okay, I know that maybe, again, you're the top of the top, but there could be things that are lacking. Like when you're talking about that level of competition, I can't even imagine.
Let me ask you this real quick. So you're telling me that a college board is no longer allowed to take into consideration a person's background and what they went through to get to this level of academic achievement?
Most of the people that are involved in that process have said it will make it with the parameters that the Supreme Court just put in place. It will make it virtually impossible to take somebody's their race into consideration, and a lot of times your race predicates your experience. I mean, that is what it is. And I get that a huge part of this, again, there's a whole socioeconomic component to these conversations that we need to have, because I realize that there are plenty of poor white people in this country. And there are kids that come from trailer parks, and there are kids that are white that come from projects, and there are kids that come from, the coal mines of West Virginia and are able to, that are looking at the same situation as any kid from the inner city. I'm not trying to debunk or or to take away from. I get all of that. I just don't see a problem. And even they are not. Doesn't matter that they're white, right? Again, there's an access that comes with privilege. Like there's an access that comes, like even at the University of Miami. If you looked around our campus, almost everybody there came from a privileged background. Like if you go to FIU, not so much, right? You have that comment to be like, I wanted to go to UM, but I couldn't afford it, right? Like, because FIU is a public university, incredible university. But if you looked around the campus, black, brown, white, didn't matter. If you really got down to the nitty gritty, majority of that student body came from families, I don't want to say that had money, but that had influence or middle class at the least. And again, that was across all the races. The ones who didn't were usually there, on scholarship. Like you had a lot of the athletes that came from right here in Dade County, not to take away from what they did academically, because many of them were brilliant. But like if you talk to them, you'd be like, I'm from Liberty City. I have a 5.2 GPA, and they would run down the list. But majority of the student body at UM, most people would consider privileged. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
isn't that why we have private schools?
Isn't that why we have private schools? I mean,
isn't that why we have, Walmart and Macy's?
It is, but that's a different. And again, but that to me though, and that's a choice, right? Like if you that's what you want to pay. School. No. Again, I'm agreeing with you. And private schools versus public schools, but you do that because you want your child to have an advantage. Like you're inherently admitting that when you take your child from public school and put them in private school, you are trying to give your kid a leg up.
Yeah.
Right? And you can do that.
Keep them out of trouble like I got in when I was in public school.
You don't think kids in private school get into trouble?
No, I know they do.
Tabor Cat,
I know they do, but, you have more control. You have, I don't think there's a lot of parents at our school that are not involved in their kids day to day.
You can be as involved as you want. That does not mean your kid is not doing drugs. That does not mean your kid is not having sex. That does not mean your kid is not getting in with the wrong crowd.
You're absolutely right.
That does not mean your kid isn't bucking the system,
but
cheating on tests.
When you're in a public school, there's a lot more kids that are just running the street.
That's a very, very broad statement.
No, it's a very real statement. In public schools, there's a lot of kids.
And in private schools, there's a lot of absolute degenerates.
Absolutely.
That have money, privilege, and have absolutely no sense of right or wrong.
You're absolutely right.
You're
absolutely right.
Especially the more elite the private school is, the more dysfunctional and degenerate the student body tends to be. Like, again, I come from Massachusetts, where we have some of the most elite prep schools on planet Earth. People from all over the world send their kids there. And when I tell you, my God, my friends that were dope boys had better relationships with them rich-ass kids from Tabor Academy, than they had with anybody at our 5,000 person public high school, because those were the kids buying all the drugs.
Mm-hmm.
All of them. Those are the kids drinking and driving in their BMWs and crashing cars and calling daddy who's a diplomat and getting immunity. Like, that shit is real. Gossip Girl, real. Euphoria is also real. As scary as that might be to some fucking parents watching out there, that is the shit that is happening in high school. That's the shit that was happening when you were in high school. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter public or private. Kids are kids, like you have said to me a million times. Yeah. Gonna do drugs. They're gonna have sex. They're gonna make mistakes. They're gonna be stupid. That is what kids do. So when you put your child in a private school, though, that's about access, and you know it. That's about networking and connections and resources and tutoring, and it's about limiting the number of students to teacher ratio.
I'm a firm believer that public schools should have the same resources,
but they don't.
That's everyone in this fucking country's fault.
1,000%.
That's everyone in this country's fault. Okay, that's an easy fucking fix, and nobody wants to fix it.
But with that being said, that same mentality, like that level of access, that all changes the landscape. And affirmative action was put in place not just to guarantee that schools had to diversify their student population, but that students who didn't have that early access weren't penalized for it. Like, that, I think, is the bigger point to even what Michelle Obama is saying. Like, in her mind, she said people would always... Do you think that that's easy? I can't imagine what that had to have been like, especially when affirmative action was first placed, to be... She said it, and I'm sure there's still not a shit ton of black or brown, or even Asian students on Ivy League campuses. But knowing that people will say that behind your back, like, that's a testament to how far we have not come. The fact that is still a part of the conversation. Oh, the only reason why you got this is because of affirmative action. The only reason why you got this. The fact that this was brought.
Well, the only reason you got this is because who your daddy is. Or the only reason you got this is because you're a good athlete. It's the same thing.
But I think
it's the same thing.
No, but that's only, like, I don't.
Have you ever watched that
Lenny,
documentary
that's
about
not
the
offensive, though.
kids?
Do you realize that, though? That's not offensive to most people that grow up
How do you know how they feel?
in elite circles.
How do you know how they
feel? Because I'm around them. I've been around them.
Well,
they're not offended by people. They like to tell people who their daddy is. They like to flex on, I'm a legacy student. Like, that's a point of pride for them. Yeah. I can understand your argument about athletes, and I think maybe there's a few people, and in business it's probably a little bit harder. If you're the son of the owner of a company, you only got this because,
nepotism.
That's probably a frustrating, conversation to have. But then there's other people that will go, yeah, you're fucking right. You know what I mean? And I think to some point it's like, it's not about how you get in, but can you stay? Like, that's the other thing too. Do you really give a fuck how somebody got in? Are they doing the work to stay there? Because once you're in, even if academically they lowered the standards, which I'm not saying that they do, but even if they did, even if they allowed, for a lack of resources, they allowed for public school, they allowed, for circumstantial evidence, for lack of a better term.
What do you call a med student who graduates with a C?
I don't know what.
Doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't fucking matter. They did the work, whether they're the best or the worst. They did the work, which is what the academic world is about. This is just, for me, revolving around this one point. It's revolving around this one part. It's not about where the kids came from. It's not about where they're going or if they're going to achieve.
But did you hear the rest of that, though? It does, but it is, because affirmative action changes the trajectory of a group of people in terms of what they attain and accomplish in the future. Having access to certain institutions does, in fact, change your earning potential.
All I want, Kimmy, all I want is a graph of what affirmative action, changes on that application. Show me why the 5 people here who were the day before and the 5 people who were here the day after totally change their mindset on who they accept into this college
Okay.
based on affirmative action. I want to know what all I want is to see what that
Lenny,
thing
there are
I
still
get.
but there are still people in this world who are forced to hire a woman, who are forced to hire a person of color, right? Because the law says so. You can't discriminate against them because of these things legally. So you either find a loophole or you bite the bullet, right? That just is what it is.
Mhm.
Which means that there is still inherent bias. So again, you're looking at it like all of these people who work in academia are just, neutral and unbiased, and they want the best possible students for their whatever. Like, and wouldn't that be nice? But if that was the case, they would have been accepting these students without having to be told to do so. Like, do you remember like the University of Alabama?
Yeah, but you're telling me that affirmative action says 13% or 15% or 20% of your students have to be ethnically diverse. Have to. By law, your college has to be 20% ethnically diverse. And it doesn't matter whether they're academically the same level as the other 80%. 20% has to be this.
It's considering students' background characteristics such as race as a factor in deciding whether to admit an applicant.
Okay.
In higher education context, affirmative action, which stemmed from the civil rights movement in the 60s, is the practice of considering student background characteristics such as race as a factor in deciding whether to admit an applicant.
Yeah. I still think that they could be admitted. I mean, people are going to fight.
But here's the thing, though. Like, if you're looking at a student's application and you're no longer allowed to take into consideration, again,
no longer allowed.
their
now
race,
that's a
their
funny,
economic status.
that's a funny thing. You're going to take it into consideration no matter what because you're human. Just like the Supreme Court takes into
there may have been
consideration
people
whatever
that
they
didn't want
feel.
them there, though, because they didn't before. There were a lot of people on boards that didn't want these individuals there, period. And then you have some people who take those things into account and go, damn, you overcame all of these things, right? You're still academically exceptional, but you've overcome all of these things. That's impressive. Like, we want you in our school because of that.
Yeah, well, that's
right?
based on the people. It's not based on
But
affirmative
that's
action.
the point. So when that happens, though, and you're now allowed to take certain things into consideration, you can diversify. There's a reason why college campuses looked homogeneous. Even in the Northeast, where we didn't have separate but equal. I mean, obviously, you had other situations coming into play in the South, right? We know what that was. Hence the reason why there was the establishment of HBCUs, historical black colleges and universities. And they do, in fact, accept white students. Go to FAMU, go to Howard. You know what I mean? Obviously, though, white students are going to be in the minority on those campuses. And you know that when applying as a white student to a historically black college and university. The same way when you are a person of color, you know that when you're applying to, I mean, there were universities up north, though, that didn't accept women. You know what I'm saying? Like, you couldn't get into Harvard Law as a female until, like, I want to say almost like Hillary Clinton's generation. Like, she didn't go to Harvard. She went to, Sarah Lawrence? Whatever. Remember, they had, like, sister schools. Like, Harvard was male. And there was
My friend's a female.
A sister school.
She graduated, I think, second in her class in Harvard.
Yeah, but when? When did she go? And how many women were there? Like,
90s?
We're
Early
still
90s?
making progress in that space. It's certainly not split. There's more
Early
women.
90s. Late 80s, early.
There's more women in America. There's more women on the planet than there are men. So shouldn't there be more women enrolled at Harvard Law than there are men, just off of the numbers?
I mean, listen, it's
just, but
it is what it is.
But
I mean, I don't
I'm just
know.
saying, but this is why.
Is there the same amount of women applicants as there is men?
Probably not. But again, that goes back to the other conversation we had, Len, about where do we guide young men versus where do we guide young women? I mean, for a long time, you couldn't go to law school. Like, you couldn't go. They weren't going to accept you. You couldn't go. Period. You had to be out here willing to, break barriers. And their stories are incredible. There's stories, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has some incredible stories about her experience leading up to her time on the Supreme Court. And you're just like, what? But she pushed through. So I'm here for perseverance. But, certain pieces of legislation were passed out of an acknowledgement that shit hadn't been fair for a very long time. And we know that people haven't changed as much as we would like to believe they have, because look at the things that are being rolled back now. We literally just rolled back Roe v. Wade, right? Like, we've taken body autonomy away from women. A law that was passed in 1970, or a judgment that was sent down by the Supreme Court in 73, 50 years later. Right? Like, so again, as much as you'd like to think we've evolved, I don't know. Have we really? And is that something that I want to roll the dice with when it comes to future generations of students? I just, I don't see the harm in setting in wanting, especially with elite institutions, because that's just, it's such a game changer. Where you go to school, like, I hate to say this, when you're in that world, it's wild. Like, that's why, like, you're guaranteed to come out making six figures. Like, it doesn't matter at that point. It doesn't matter. Like you said, it doesn't matter. Especially in business, that they just want that. Like, I remember I told you, I was bartending a party because my family was in the liquor business for these people in the Cape Cod area. And the dad, Harvard grad, big finance firm on State Street in Boston, which is kind of like, a Wall Street in New York City. And the son was there with all of his friends. And I overheard this conversation. Who do you think they were all working with that summer, right? All his boys were interning with his dad on State Street. Guess where they all went to school? Harvard. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, you can see it. Like, you're watching what you read about, what we talk so much about, happen in real time, right? And again, that's something that we should be addressing much earlier on in terms of teaching people how to network, how to walk into a room, how to shake hands, how to identify who the players are in a situation. Out
of all the private colleges in this school, how many graduates is there from Harvard? You're only going to have, there's elite for a reason. It's like, how many kids are playing football all the way through high school and through college and then make it to the NFL? They're elite. It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
But you can't tell me that even percentage-wise, though, there aren't that many Black students, brown students, Asian students, students from just different walks of life, respective to their demographic, that are elite.
Yeah, but you can't base everything on demographic. To get to that elite level of Harvard, it's education, it's financial backing, there's a lot of things. But
exactly. And this is a way of evening the playing field for the folks who don't have access because of the circumstances that they were born into.
No.
That's how you don't change the 1%.
That's not what this is.
Yes, Lenny, that's exactly what it is.
Race.
No, considering student background characteristics such as race. But again, oftentimes race in this country plays into socioeconomics. It plays into where you grew up, the kind of education you had access to, the opportunities you had access to, and a lot of times that can be limiting.
Okay. I get
versus
it.
The excessive amount of opportunity and access other people are born into. This is how the 1% never change. You're the guy that sits here and talks about the 1% running everything, right? This was an attempt to change up what that 1% looks like, because these are the people that
maybe at some point affirmative action overall was important, but it was based on not just upper level college. It was not. That was not what it was started.
It's employment.
It was started to get communities more diverse overall. It had nothing to do with Harvard.
But you do realize, though, that education plays into employment opportunities. We know this. You're an entrepreneur, so that's a different.
How about
realm.
Just teaching kids how to make money out of high school? How about teaching them what they need to know in the lower schools? You're talking about elite level students. Forget about 1% money. You're talking about elite level students
But you realize that's how
that
you
go to
change-
Harvard.
But that's how you change generations for people. Like, you
Listen,
realize that access to that is what
I
changes.
really don't feel like if you had 10 academically, ethnically diverse students that were academically overachievers and capable of getting into Harvard, that their skin color is going to stop them.
Not even that, though. Not getting into Harvard isn't going to stop them.
No.
I mean, I'm with you on that. And there are people right now that'll middle finger all day to Harvard and say, I'm going to Howard. You know what I mean? There are plenty of people. It's unfortunate that Americans as a whole, unfortunately, you know, have less academic right to our institutions of higher learning than a lot of people from other countries, because our education system is failing so monumentally. Do you know what I mean? Like, you go on a lot of these campuses and it's not even necessarily Americans that are enrolled.
Been like that for a long time.
You know what I mean? So, and again, you know how I feel about public education. You know how I feel about education as a whole. I've been reading a lot of stories, or I should say articles, about Finland and them eliminating private schools altogether. And they said within like 5 years, they ended up with some of the best public education in the world. Because one thing rich people are not going to do is sacrifice their children's access to quality education.
Yeah, well.
So when you force everybody to go to the same schools, rich, poor, and in between, guess what? People pick up the slack. You know what I'm saying? But unfortunately, we're doing the exact opposite in this country right now with this whole choice of school and pushing charter schools. My bigger question is, I just don't understand why people are so hell-bent on taking away things that were put in place to protect or to level the playing field. Like, that's my biggest, you know, I was never getting into Harvard. I don't feel like because there's affirmative action, that's what kept me from getting into Harvard. You feel me? My lack of, you know, time management skills.
Yeah, but I'm sure there's a lot of white kids who are at that level and feel that way.
But that's but to me, but your same point.
So who cares? You're white. You'll be fine. Is that what you're saying?
No, not at all.
But
what I'm saying is
so it's not level.
You still have access to 65 or like, and again, there's nothing that that I read to you that says a certain percentage is set aside. What they're saying is they're allowing admissions boards to take into consideration these things in terms of evening out or accepting it. I think that people wanted to see diversity. And here's the thing. Honestly, Len, in 2023, I think student bodies will hold their boards and their institutions of higher learning accountable for diversity. I think that we're at that place. I think that your daughter is the type that if she went to, she doesn't want to go to a campus with a bunch of Mirandas. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And nothing else.
No,
like,
absolutely.
because that's not what children are experiencing, even in, you know, private schools like the one she goes to, right? Like, you want some level of diversity. The problem, I think, just comes into play where it's like, okay, if I have limited access, limited funds, and I can only apply to 3 schools, I'm going to apply to the ones where I feel most welcomed, like I have the best chance of getting in, you know, and where I know I'm going to see other people that look like me. So that may take Harvard out of the running, and now maybe I apply to like Howard. I don't know what that looks like, because again, I was never in that situation. I was excited to come to the University of Miami because it was in Miami and I knew it was going to be diverse, and I wanted that coming from the high school and the community that I came from. Like, I didn't want to go to a homogenous university, you know, UMass Amherst, like, and not that UMass Amherst is that, I'm not trying to be shady, but like, I wanted to go to a school in a community with different people. So, I mean, like I said,
I feel you.
I'm not
All right.
understanding.
Well, we're gonna come back to this topic, I'm sure, but let's wrap up our episode 58.
Lenny,
What?
you're such a terrible host. Like, I
Why?
love you
I'm
because
such a good host.
you just know. Like, can you find a more eloquent way to say we're done? Like, than just cutting me off like mid-sentence or not.
I didn't. I waited till
it.
you finished.
No,
I waited till you
That's
finished.
just a terrible way
We'll
to
roll
wrap.
back the clip. I waited
It's
till
a
you finished.
terrible way to wrap, though. Like,
Well,
we're
how else do
58
we wrap?
episodes in. Not, that's it. That's all, folks. Like, nah, bro. Like, even WB fucking cartoons have a more fucking synchronized or synergistic ending than what you do when you do that.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I'm just a man.
Listen, that's episode 58, folks. We'll see you next time. Check us out absolutely everywhere. You can get podcasts, like, subscribe, share, follow, leave comments, do whatever. Peace out.
Peace.